breakups. Oof. Just saying the word hits different, doesn't it?
It really does.
That punch in the gut feeling, the constant replay of memories, the sheer confusion and pain. It's just one of those uniquely human, universally awful experiences.
Absolutely awful.
But while that hurt is like the common thread, what happens after how we process all that emotional fallout, well, that might not be quite so universal.
Exactly. It's a space where, despite the shared pain, men and women often seem to be navigating the landscape of heartbreak using, different maps.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is exploring why that is, sort of digging into the psychological roots and the societal layers involved.
And that's basically our mission in this deep dive today. We've looked into a body of work exploring these emotional truths of breakups, pulling from psychology, from research, to see what really happens when relationships end. We want to unpack the surprising differences and maybe some hidden similarities too, just to give you a clearer picture of this whole emotional roller coaster.
Okay, let's try and unpack this then. So at the heart of any breakup, you've got the severing of an emotional bond, right?
Right. The connection's broken.
And we learned that the way we even form these bonds can kind of set the stage for how we handle their breaking. For instance, the research points to women often developing stronger emotional ties, or maybe just expressing them more readily. They seem generally more comfortable being expressive about those feelings.
Right, while the stuff we looked at suggests men might form those attachments a little slower, maybe, on the surface. But they form them deeply, really deeply.
Oh, for sure.
The challenge seems less about the depth of the bond and maybe more about the ease of communicating the pain when it breaks.
Yeah.
It's almost like the emotional operating system has different default settings for showing distress.
And this connects directly to attachment theory, which is a concept that helps explain some of these initial differences you see. The research suggests women are statistically more likely to show anxious attachment styles. That tendency to seek reassurance, closeness, which can mean leaning into connection and expression when things go wrong.
Seeking comfort, yeah.
Whereas men, they're more commonly categorized with avoidance styles. So a tendency to withdraw, suppress emotions, especially when they're under stress, like a breakup.
That makes perfect sense. If you're wired to seek reassurance, you'll probably talk about the pain. If you're wired to avoid discomfort, you pull away. So, okay, let's look at those initial reactions then. The research suggests a pretty stark difference right out of the gate.
Yeah, we see a pattern where, for men, there's often this immediate move towards suppression. It feels tied to those cultural expectations, the old man-up narrative,
Oh yeah, just deal with it.
Exactly. So their immediate coping mechanisms might be things like hitting the gym really hard, burying themselves in work, maybe jumping quickly into rebound relationships.
Yeah, distraction.
Starting a new casual thing quickly, basically as a distraction, or just a general kind of emotional shutdown. It's all about distraction and actively avoiding memories or even places linked to the ex.
Meanwhile, the research highlights that women are generally quicker to actually engage with the heartbreak head on. You see crying, confiding in friends, really reflecting on the relationship.
And these aren't just reactions, they're immediate processing mechanisms.
Right, they're doing the work.
And that immediate processing is absolutely key. It suggested that while women might feel that initial sting, that raw, acute pain more intensely right at the very beginning,
that difficult but direct engagement actually helps them start healing sooner. And it positions them to emerge emotionally stronger in the long run, often.
Precisely. And this leads us right into the different coping mechanisms we see play out over time. Beyond those initial reactions, these patterns tend to solidify. So men often lean into those distraction-based strategies, maybe more video games, casual dating, immersing themselves in really intense activities, and there's still that avoidance piece, literally trying to suppress memories or just staying away from places associated with the relationship. It can look like emotional numbness from the outside.
While the research suggests women's preferred coping styles heavily involve more verbal and reflective processing, actually talking it out with friends, maybe journaling, consciously thinking through what happened, and engaging in self-care, like new hobbies or focusing on personal well-being.
And this difference immediately highlights the critical role of social support, doesn't it?
Hugely.
Absolutely. What we found really underscores how women tend to lean heavily on their social circles. Those conversations with friends, family, sometimes therapists, they provide crucial validation, a space to process feelings openly, and just combat that terrible feeling of isolation that breakups bring.
Yeah, that network acts as a vital emotional safety net.
It really does.
In men. The pattern seems to be more towards isolation, right? A feeling like they need to tough it out alone, which the research suggests is actually really detrimental.
It is. That lack of external support seems to be a significant factor. It can severely delay their healing process. All those powerful emotions just get internalized, bottled up.
Which can lead to less healthy stuff down the line, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly, which leads us to the long-term impacts.
So let's connect that lack of processing and the isolation to the long-term stuff, especially mental health. If men are suppressing more, going it alone, what does the research suggest happens?
Well, the findings indicate that unprocessed emotional trauma in men can unfortunately contribute to issues like depression, sometimes an increased risk of substance abuse, and it can even negatively impact their work performance.
Wow.
And it suggested that men may actually feel the real emotional impact of a breakup long after the relationship has physically ended, precisely because they didn't allow themselves to process it properly up front.
So that delayed reaction isn't just a different timeline. It can mean some serious long-term consequences. Okay, so on the other side, what about women? The research points to significant long-term emotional growth for those who engage in that upfront processing.
Yes, often. Because they are, generally speaking, more culturally encouraged to feel and express these things, they often come out of the experience with increased emotional intelligence, maybe a clearer understanding of healthy relationship boundaries for the future, and just a greater sense of self-awareness that they gained through that difficult reflection. It's a painful process, no doubt, but one that often fosters real, lasting personal development.
This brings us right face-to-face with the huge role of cultural context and those gendered expectations. The research really emphasizes this as a major driver of these differences, doesn't it?
Oh, it's massive. That societal pressure on male emotional stoicism, that deeply ingrained man-up idea, it's taught from such a young age, and it actively discourages vulnerability. So it leads men to mask their sorrow, often behind this facade of indifference or just constant distraction.
Yeah, you see it reinforced everywhere, and movies, sports culture, even just casual comments among guys sometimes. This idea that showing emotional pain makes you weak.
Which, as the research points out, has really serious consequences. That chronic suppression of feelings, it can cause long-term psychological damage. It can lead to stress, anxiety, even emotional numbness over time. It's a heavy burden to carry just to fit a rigid expectation.
And the contrast with women. The research shows they're generally more encouraged to express emotions and seek support.
Right. This societal permission, if you like, allows for a much healthier grieving process overall. Crying, talking about feelings, it's generally seen as acceptable, even necessary. And the presence of safe spaces, those strong networks of friends and family who validate their pain, that's crucial here.
And this acceptance of vulnerability, it seems to foster what's been described as a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
Leading to deeper self-reflection, maybe increased maturity, and greater emotional clarity coming out of the whole thing.
It's a really stark contrast in the pathways that culture seems to offer. Now let's think about what happens after the initial shock wears off a bit, specifically around seeking closure.
Okay. Who does the research suggest is more likely to try and get that final conversation, that understanding?
Studies seem to indicate women are generally more likely to initiate those post-breakup talks, to understand what went wrong. They're often seeking that emotional clarity, maybe reassurance that why, that can help them make peace and actually move forward.
And men often avoid those conversations. Is that the pattern?
Yes, often to escape the discomfort of feeling vulnerable or maybe just direct confrontation. It circles back to that challenge with openly expressing painful emotions.
Right. And in our super modern world, digital behavior adds another whole layer to this, doesn't it? What do we find there?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating window. Women might use actions like unfollowing, blocking, or even monitoring an ex's activity online.
Yeah, the digital checkup.
Right, but as part of emotional regulation, it's a way of trying to control their environment and manage triggers while they heal.
And men, what patterns did we see there? Ghosting.
Yeah, things like ghosting, just abruptly cutting off all communication, or staying completely silent. But then, paradoxically, sometimes reappearing sporadically through subtle digital interactions, like, liking an old photo or sending a random out-of-the-blue message months later.
Which the research suggests might indicate unresolved feelings.
Exactly. It seems to be a less direct, less vulnerable way of maintaining some kind of presence or connection, even if it's incredibly confusing for everyone involved.
Okay, this brings us to a question that gets asked a lot, sometimes controversially. can breakups actually be more painful for men?
This is where it gets really interesting. We looked at a specific study from 2021, published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, and its findings are quite compelling. It suggests that men often experience breakups just as painfully, if not more so than women.
But internally, not visibly.
Precisely. Because they are less likely to discuss these feelings openly, their heartbreak isn't as visible to the outside world, but it can be profoundly more damaging internally, potentially leading to really prolonged distress.
This links right back to that idea of a delayed grieving process we touched on earlier, doesn't it?
Exactly. Since they may not allow themselves to grieve properly in the immediate aftermath, that emotional reaction often gets pushed back. The research indicates this can manifest later as sudden depressive episodes, maybe weeks or even months down the line.
Wow.
Or poor impulse decisions, like quickly jumping into unhealthy rebound relationships, or even struggling to form deep, trusting connections in future relationships because that past pain just hasn't been dealt with.
It sounds like the pain is still very much there, just buried deep, waiting for something to trigger it.
That's right. The research describes how those pent-up emotions for men can just resurface unexpectedly, triggered by something as simple as hearing a particular song, seeing an old photo, running into the ex, or even watching a movie that resonates. And these moments can just unleash this torrent of buried feelings.
And when they do surface, it might come out as anger or frustration, sudden uncontrollable crying spells sometimes, deep regret, or just intense longing.
Yeah, it means their healing journey can often be more chaotic, less predictable, maybe less linear compared to the path often taken by women who engage in more of that upfront processing.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the rebuilding process that we often see in women after that initial shock and processing phase.
Right. The research highlights a really significant phase of self-reflection and intentional growth for many women. After navigating the initial acute pain, they often move into asking these crucial questions. What did I learn from this whole experience? How can I use this to improve my future relationships? What aspects of myself need healing or attention right now?
That phase sounds like it lays a really strong foundation for significant personal development moving forward.
It absolutely does. And tied closely to that is the process of rebuilding their identity, kind of outside of the relationship. We see women actively picking up new hobbies, consciously reconnecting with friends and family networks that might have taken a bit of a back seat during the relationship.
Yeah.
Setting new career goals or personal life goals.
These are really empowering actions, aren't they? They're actively redefining who they are and regaining that sense of control and confidence in their lives. It feels like a very deliberate process of healing and growth.
It really is, often. And based on everything we've discussed, maybe we can touch briefly on some of those common questions that naturally come up from all this.
Okay, quick hits. Like, does this mean men suffer more after a breakup?
Based on that study we mentioned, potentially more intensely internally, yes, and maybe for a longer overall duration because of the suppression and that delayed grieving process. It's different from the initial acute pain women often describe.
Okay. And why does it often look like women move on faster?
Well, the research suggests it's likely because they express and process those emotions more freely, and they effectively utilize their social support networks much more often. That seems to help accelerate the initial stages of recovery and the outward signs of moving forward.
Right. Makes sense. Can a breakup actually affect your physical health? Is that a real thing?
Oh, definitely. The stress and the emotional toll can absolutely impact physical well-being. It can affect your sleep, your appetite, even weaken your immune system. That applies to anyone going through it, regardless of gender.
Okay. And the big one. Is it okay to stay friends with an ex?
The research implies it's possible, but it's definitely challenging. It really depends on whether both individuals have truly healed emotionally and if they can establish clear, genuinely platonic boundaries. Any lingering romantic feelings or resentment can make it very difficult and potentially quite unhealthy.
Yeah, tricky waters. So, thinking about all of this, I guess the main takeaway is pretty clear. Breakups are just incredibly difficult for everyone, full stop. Men might navigate that pain more silently, sort of internalizing their suffering, while women might experience more acute initial pain, but often move towards processing and recovery sooner. Both genders face heartbreak, just often on different emotional pathways.
And the overriding message from all the research seems to be the critical importance of emotional honesty, actually allowing yourself to feel the pain, whatever it is, and actively seeking support during that healing process. Whether that's from friends, family, or professional help, those seem to be the most vital factors for moving through it constructively for anyone.
Because by embracing those things, healing isn't just about getting over someone, is it? It can be a really powerful catalyst for self-discovery and growth.
Exactly. So, considering how deeply these cultural expectations seem to shape the different emotional paths men and women often take through heartbreak, maybe a final thought for you listening is, what does this understanding mean for how you might approach your own healing journey the next time you face a breakup? Or perhaps, how might this knowledge change the way you think about and support someone else who's going through that process?
Yeah, definitely something to really mull over.